most of you have been here for a lot of this really wonderful day. I think it's been a fantastic day, and thanks so much to Kings. Oh, can you hear me? Because I know that. Okay. I think we'll all try and keep the microphones near us, but not maddeningly near, so that we pop. And we'll sort of push them from one to another. Thank you to Kings for organising today. Thank you for inviting me to be part of it. And thank you, of course, above all, to Maureen Duffy for giving us the occasion with her truly quite amazing and amazingly diverse work. I'm Maggie G, and I'm a novelist. I feel proud to be among poets today. I might have said humbled if Rupert Murdoch had wrecked any use of the word humbled. But I'm proud most of all to chair a panel talking about Maureen Duffy, whose work has inspired me as a novelist since I was a young woman. And I discovered her poetry later, but I've realised that that is certainly the equal of her fiction, and maybe even greater. I don't know. Anyway, as Virginia Woolf says, what is great, what is small. There's so much wonderful work. On the panel today are Alan Brown-John on the far end, poet, novelist, editor and translator. His latest titles are Windows on the Moon, a novel, 2009, and The Saner Places, Selected Poems, 2011. Alan knew Maureen back in the 1950s, and he's going to talk about that, and I think the life of poets in London then, and read from her last but one poetry collection, Family Values. Very sadly, Elaine Feinstein, who is going to be here, and is an old poetic colleague of Maureen and has written about her work and had one of Maureen's poems dedicated to her, woke up this morning really unable to speak. We had a voiceless conversation this morning, and she can't be with us. But I think she's here in spirit, and certainly that poem is going to be read. And it's going to be read by Rutha Callahan. So sorry, I've got two Ruths on this panel. And this is a late addition to the swapping of the poems has only just arrived, just before the tea break, hasn't it, that you're reading Elaine's poem. So this information hasn't really percolated my brain yet. So sorry. I know. I apologise. I won't do it again. Rutha Callahan is reading second now, not third. Poet and educator, recently been sent to Mongolia by the Arts Council to work with women poets there, and received a gold medal from the 30th World Congress of Poets. She's going to talk about Maureen's early novel, The Microcosm, and Maureen's work for social justice in that context. And she's going to read Travellers, the poem that Maureen dedicated to Elaine. On my other side, a different Ruth, completely Ruth Fainlight, poet, short story writer and translator, published her new and collected poems with Blood Axe in 2010. And Ruth, I'm very happy to say, is going to mine the golden vein of love poems in Maureen's work, which I think is almost the strongest vein in her work. So that's going to be wonderful. I'm looking forward to that. And lastly, David Constantine, poet, academic, and writer of short fiction, who won the BBC National Short Story Award in 2010, and in 2013, with his new collection of short stories, Tea at the Midland and Other Stories, won the Frank O'Connor Award. Is going to read, now I think we need help from Maureen, how to pronounce Eirlys. Is it Eirlys? Eirlys? Eirlys, which is a poem that catches, like many others of Maureen's, the heroism and beauty of supposedly ordinary lives. So I'm very glad he's going to be reading that. Before I hand over to Maureen, I'm going to say something brief, briefer than I thought it was going to be, because I know we're running slightly late, about Maureen, that I hope hasn't entirely been said. I'm just writing a long piece on the new novel in times like these and the new poetry collection, Environmental Studies. I think they're as good as, if not better than, anything she's ever written. The novel is my favourite of her recent novels. Both books are illuminated and given depth by 7th century literature, by Old English, which has come up again and again, the importance of the Anglo-Saxon, as it was called then, and I'm not sure if it still is today, but she studied at King's. When you try to place Maureen in a tradition, it's very clear to me that she will be seen in the great tradition of English literature. I'm absolutely sure of that, by people looking back in even 50 years, but I'm quite sure in 100 years she will. But it's quite hard to see what tradition to put her in, because you can think of the writers she's written back to in her work, and they're very various, aren't they? Because you can think about Sappho and the Greeks, or you can think about the Old English poets, or you can think about Villon and the troubadours, or you can think about what outsiders have brought to English literature, and I think they're of Doris Lessing, and these are outsiders in different ways. I think of Doris Lessing and J.G. Ballard, I'm thinking of novelists here, and Brian Aldiss and Bernardine Evaristo. I see all these as outsiders to the tradition of the sort of most central tradition of English fiction. And I see that Maureen showed us, again, as Virginia Woolf did, how to be fantastical and political in fiction, which is great. There's not a choice. You can do all that. But then you've also got to think of the traditions, the names and words and habits from her childhood. And that tradition she links us to in so many of her poems, to her mother tongue and her mother's tongue. So I think that is important. And she also links us to all the other living things, to animals, to snails and woodlice. It's this great empathy that I think she has for other living things, and for dead writers, and for live writers, and for live, even tiny things living under our giant human shadows. She has empathy for in her work. I think her work is deeply enjoyable, and that's why today has been so deeply enjoyable. However, and this was talked about this morning, older poets do not have an easy life, and but Maureen will always see that in the great tradition of what has happened to poets and minstrels before. Favour comes and favour goes. And there's a poem in Environmental Studies called Dale, and it's a reference to a fragmentary Old English poem called Dale, and it's one of the few that has a refrain, and the refrain I could have a go at. It's, again, sorry if it's pronounced wrong, Thas ophareoda, This's swa mai, something like that, and it means those sorrows past, so this one will too. And it is a minstrel who's been really a singer thrown out of the court for probably a younger and more successful one, and he's comforting himself by thinking of all the other troubles of historical figures. They passed, so this will too. And this is Maureen's reply. Dale. Did your lord and master give you your name, Dale, precious poet, dear one? As another might say now, you're very valuable to our list after winning a Nobel, you know, even though you don't make us as much money as a failed politician's randy memoirs before he dumped you. Was it just that you were no longer young and handsome, an ornament to the mead hall, and he fell for a new bard? Poets have no lien on lands. Exiled, a wanderer, no longer on mainstream lists, festival programmes, magazine. This craft so long to learn brings you your only comfort. Poets have always known it, so don't hold up the sufferings of Wayland, cuffed and bound, Beardo Hill's grief, meth-filled, unhappy in love. The people's punished by tyrants as heart's ease, while your sore-caring soul resonates down, down the centuries. We have all felt what it is to be ousted by the full sail of his proud verse, like a dear, deer, once hand-fed, now hounded off the land, Clare tucked away in the Northampton Asylum after the glamouring of London's lights. Those may have passed over. This doesn't. But that's only really one of the moods of Maureen on poetry. And a very different one is her That Time of Year, which is, so sorry, I think what I'm going to do is, here we are. This gives you a much more of a, I think, an adventurous feel to being an older poet, to being dauntless and to having fun. That time of year thou mayst in me behold. Poets don't grow old gracefully. Recall old lusts with Hardy, or clamour like Yeats for new. How are you? People ask them, meaning, goodness, you're still alive. Are you still writing? Signals, if so, you're quite forgotten. I haven't seen any reviews. And aren't you going gently yet into your good night? Gower, his loins frozen by Venus, piped to the king and his bounty of wine. Did he who had sung of every turn and twist of love regret the arrow's sting he'd begged love's priest to tear from his heart as he lay apart from his chaste wife? Merlin, the magus besotted in old age, entombed in the rock by Nimue for his lust, must have been a poet too. How else could he have cast such spells? When David was old, they brought him a virgin, hoping for a new song of Solomon. Help us all then, Sappho. Help us all then, lady, Sappho's own goddess, to sing your song until the last bittersweet note. And I'm going to hand over from that looking back from late in life to Alan Brown-John's Memories of Maureen back in the 1950s.
Well, I obtained permission to reminisce as well as rejoice, and it won't be entirely about the 1950s, but the first of my 4 moments of reminiscence will be there, and it will be in remembering the extraordinary Thursday nights at the flat of George G.S. Fraser in Beaufort Mansions, Chelsea, where his wife, the lovely Paddy Fraser, would put the children to bed before the poets arrived, and evenings of relative order or complete chaos would ensue, in which people invited or invited by poets who had been invited went and read their poems, and that is where I first met you, Maureen. And I don't really recall if we spoke there, but I certainly noticed you, as everybody else did, asking each other who that was. That's the most attractive person, reading the most attractive material, and she was something of a mystery. And the children were there in bed, and later, many years later, one of the children, I think possibly as a result of those evenings, became a publishing supremo who banished poets from the list of a celebrated publisher, possibly because of having to go to bed early or hours later. We've been responsible for some strange things indirectly, and that may have been one of them. I want to jump now to WAG, the Writers' Action Group, which to me is there still in my filing cabinet in the great stack of single-spaced bulletins that passed on every move that Maureen and Bridget Brophy were making to somehow break the ongoing parliamentary obstruction of the efforts to get the public lending right on the statute book, which in the end succeeded, but my gosh, it was a battle. And people who sympathised and supported, as all the writers did, and we used to meet in meetings in different places, somewhere in Chelsea or the centre of London, and they would get extraordinary, unlikely writers to turn up. John Brain, you remember, Room at the Top, he turned up, and all sorts of people were drawn in by the energy of these two people. And you read in those bulletins of wonderful gossip exactly who the enemies were in the House of Commons and the House of Lords, but they were overcome. And all our thanks has been made clear in the afternoon. My thanks still, every time. February, the public lending right amount will come. And yes, J.K. Rowling is going to get 6,600, but don't we rejoice, all the rest of us, for getting maybe 100 if we're lucky. All I know is that it buys a good few curries every time that it comes to me. And I'm very, very pleased indeed to have it. The third moment is a moment of, well, I'm grateful for all of it, but a particular moment of gratitude for a good turn you did me, having been to an international conference in Banff, Canada. Maureen came back, wrote a lovely article in the New Statesman, and I checked on this. The phrase that lingered in my mind for many years was correct, because I'd been to one or two such things. The lingua bureaucratica, seemingly inseparable from conferences. That didn't stop her writing a lovely, lyrical, informative article in the New Statesman and Nation, as it was then, beginning and ending with the howl of the Pacific transcontinental train. And not only did she write that when she got back, but she rang me and she said, you know, I'm invited to another one in Canada. Would you believe it? Would I like to go instead? And I did, didn't I, Maureen? And it's the only time I've been to Canada, and I had an absolutely superb time. And I fended off the lingua bureaucratica and enjoyed myself with the German and the Chinese poets and the English, British poets as well. So that was a very good moment for which I'm remaining terribly grateful. And then the moments, I suppose this is a multiple of moments, of good, sensible advice, tactical advice about things to say when you happen to run into politicians. I did a bit of politics and I was a councillor at one point, and the things that Maureen told me to press with politicians if you ran into them, and advice on all sorts of issues, because she was a great fount of wisdom on all these matters. And I do remember very clearly, I don't know if you still do, Maureen, I said, what do you do? What should one do about all this technology? And she said, I can't resist it because of my international literary campaigning and commitments, but if I were you, I would resist it as long as you possibly can. And you don't know what amount of temptations and time and money that has actually saved, because I've abided by that advice. Now, most appropriate, of course, would be to end up by reading a poem, Maureen's, from Family Values, and I've chosen to read the title poem, which I suppose you could describe as a series of wagging finger maxims, things said to children by parents or uncles or aunts or grandparents, and pieces of proverbial advice, sometimes they're actually proverbs, maybe. It's in 16 lines. The last line, well, I'm going to tell you what the last line is, but I'll get to it. The last line really has echoed in modern political history an awful lot, and it's still echoing now. But the first line I'm very fond of, because it seems to me, I've done this, it seems to me a good thing to say to teenagers who get too addicted in prodding cell phones all the time, and using that as their principal social life. So, family values, homage to Francois Villon. Now that has mystified us, hasn't it? And maybe Maureen could tell me privately, or tell us all, how I know that there is a play that she wrote about Francois Villon, how this is really a homage to him, to the great medieval French poets. Anyway, family values. It'll never get better if you pick it. You eat a peck of dirt before you die. Every cloud has a silver lining. Beauty in the beholder's eye. Everything comes to him that waits. You'll change your tune when you wed. It's a poor heart that never rejoices. Never say die till you're dead. As long as you die a good colour. You must walk before you can run. You won't go till your number's up. Half a loaf is better than none. One swallow doesn't make a summer. Pride comes before a fall. Time and tide wait for no man. The weakest go to the wall. Maureen, thank you. Can I just say, great humanist as well as great poet and great novelist and playwright. And what we're all saying here today comes from the heart, the humanist gesture of sympathy and decency, or even contempt, but you have to do it without looking too camp. How people cross themselves to disapprove of something or to sanctify themselves. But humanists do it from the heart, and everything comes today from all of us from the heart. For Maureen Duffy.
Before we go on to Ruth Gallen, can I ask Maureen to tell us why that poem is dedicated to Francois Villon?
Because he has a poem made up of medieval French saints.
Ah, which one?
I can't remember the title at the moment. Do we have a French medievalist among us? No.
We can Google it, baby.
You can Google it.
We can find out.
Yeah. Well, I can look it up in my view. I can't remember it at this point.
Okay, so we're going to, what we're going to do, we're going to put Ruth Fainlight into the order where Elaine Feinstein was going, and she is going to read Travellers, which is the poem that, or you're going to read Lament for the Scribblers?
Yes.
Okay, Lament for the Scribblers.
This is the poem that Elaine was going to read. May I have the mic? Yes, of course. Is this okay? Yeah. Okay. Yes, Elaine is terribly sorry that she can't be here today. And she asked me to tell all of you, and especially tell Maureen, that she's really laid low. And she asked me to read this poem, which is the poem she was going to read of Maureen's. It's called Lament for the Scribblers. Poets should be better at winter, not to drop like the tarry stairs that feathered the telegraph wires in October, as if they had somewhere to be going, when we knew they would still mump about the backyard for a crust, till a clear night cut them down to a tattered Damalian frieze of starched black quills, relics of those two cocky whose sad plumes are tacked to the tarmac with paste of blood and bone, yet stir in a traffic draft. Pupil and master in 1 week's too much. We're not prepared, although we knew the score. 90 hoar years must soon come down to dust. Drink and despair will do for the best. The coffin wardrobe slams its door on soft shell suits, keeping a buried shape. Abandoned triangle coat hangers jangle their wiry discord. Shoes down at heel lie quiet at the back in a cord of fluff. The fedora is finally laid blackly away. Given the choice, which would we take? 5 years of life in death at the full end before the frost's sharp snip, sans peur, and everything, or a lifetime's dry Gethsemane of fear, begging for the cup to pass our lips with its mulled oblivion, the unshed words festering in the closed throat that only opens to engorge the truth spat out so often and accurately, a green goblet that cried for live coals, not the put down of gas. It gave me up, it said, you said. And there your fingers on the button for us all, us scribblers sinking through muddied middle age. No wonder that we yearn to those who keep on. Hardy taking the muse to his grave, and the vicar of nowhere, spare as sheep's bones, disdaining half-odd summer pasture to turn a field of flint. Last week, at a rare reading, I saw his hands shake, but from age or rage I couldn't tell, or Dunbar's Timor, that jostles all elbows. Except those lovers of the moon goddess, sustained by starlight. Tell us, you ghosts, paddle over Tartaros with hindsight, hot news to wrap our chips, while we shuffle on the sullen shore, our pockets crackling with obsequies to bribe wisdom out of your lines and lives. All winter we've teased you with memorials, unwilling to let you go. Now become only your paged words, true-bodied of your resurrection.
Unless you want to go on and do the rest of you, I was going to put the two together, you see. Okay, no, that's fine. Okay, so we'll go on to Ruth Callahan. Ruth.
And what of that no longer spoken? Will it wait at the crease of each corner in a slouch hat, bedraggled raincoat, melt into walls, must thicken in the air? Or slip the sash on an unguarded window, sidle into alleys less well lit, where a grey fox noses through the detritus of lives less lived? Drawn by the clatter of aluminium bins, will it stare out over wet gardens, a rust of trees? What is that ache that comes with rain? Wait for the long dawn, and the cat to carry in the thrush. That poem wasn't written by Maureen Duffy, but it could express precisely that with which her life work has been concerned. The question, and what of that no longer spoken, is exemplified in Duffy's lifelong commitment to and engagement with issues of social concern. The causes she's championed, as we've heard, are wide-ranging and include, but by no means are limited to, the environment, writers' rights, intellectual property, freedom of speech, and a myriad of political ideals. Perhaps the opening line of the poem epitomises her second novel, the seminal one of the 60s, The Microcosm. Published in 1966, this was a decade when we were finally breaking away from the austerity of the Second World War. This was a decade when free love would abound, and this was a decade which followed the 1957 Wolfenden Report, which finally decriminalised homosexuality amongst men. Women weren't subject to such prosecution because Queen Victoria, who had originally outlawed homosexuality, said women simply wouldn't do such things. Yeah. Such genteel naivety was also demonstrated when the 9 men on the 1957 Wolfenden Committee, in deference to the 3 women who also served there, renamed homosexuals and prostitutes as Huntley and Palmer's biscuit manufacturers. So it was far more difficult to wage a campaign against any form of prejudice when the very language employed avoids confrontation with actuality. When linguistic substitutions are bound to preserve false niceties within society. And it was against this background that Maureen Duffy brought to the forefront the harsh reality of choosing, if choice it was, to live within a same-sex relationship. Nearly 40 years earlier, Radcliffe Hall had published The Well of Loneliness, and many people were familiar with the escapades of the famous or the infamous ladies of Llangollen. But in a way, this created what we would now call a glass ceiling. Society had acknowledged that such relationships existed, and through publication of Radcliffe Hall's novel, had paid lip service, had said, look how far we have progressed from Victorian values. However, it could be said that although the forbidden ground had been broached, it was now far more difficult to address the issues that affected the lives of the women, as through such tacit recognition, it could be deemed that there was now no necessity to dwell further upon the subject. And what of that no longer spoken, indeed. Duffy's novel, The Microcosm, stripped all pretense, all romanticism surrounding such lives. Not for her the euphemistic phrasing of a Boston marriage, but the brute psychological trauma that such existence often brings, including that of confused identity. This confusion was born not only of trying to find a same-sex partner in a predominantly heterosexual world, but is exacerbated by a world whose mores, even in the free-loving 60s, displayed a certain attitude towards such partnerships, usually characterised by innuendos and jokes involving cucumbers. It was a confusion so fundamental that even the basic bodily function of urinating is sought as a means by which to try to achieve some semblance of belonging, some semblance of gender identity in a society that decrees one is either man or woman, masculine or feminine, butch or femme. Such is the confusion that the riven butch in Duffy's novel imitates the outward actions of a man and urinates in a standing position. I've dwelt upon the background of the novel not as a protest, not as a political statement either for or against gender discrimination, but simply to show that despite all the hidden obstacles, especially that ubiquitous glass ceiling, Maureen Duffy had the insight and courage to bring to the forefront issues that would have lain dormant, possibly for more decades. She is also blessed, of course, with the gift of presenting these issues in an engaging and thought-provoking manner. But Maureen's not only about sex, She is a deeply committed activist and is also fiercely committed to preserving our heritage. And this is noticeable in her novels, plays and poems. Her love of language, her concern for preserving old and medieval language is especially noticeable in her poetry. And down with the poem, I'd like to finish with one. This is one that Maureen dedicated to Elaine Feinstein, who unfortunately can't be here with us. Travellers, for Elaine Feinstein. Here I have followed your footprints across the world's cities, hearing your voice distinctive in every one. Some I know, many I have only seen on maps, poetic ambulant, charting not just our org like globe-trotting Elizabethan discoverers, grand tourists, or your migrant forebells and mine. Yours from Odessa, mine two-sided. Fomors from Iberia and Frenchified Vikings, neither renowned for building cities like this London we both love. Foster mother to all comers, we would have her open her gates to in welcome, as you celebrate in her many faces, facets, tracking down loves, loss, voyaging light through stories, paths, encounters, tongues, lives, time and space. You're a traveller with no need for hardware, just your words will get you there. And so I wish you all the time in the world to voyage on and back, your unique voice to wormhole into the future, so that those coming after can glimpse what it was truly like, then, there, and now. Thank you.